Okay, so last month I mentioned how these pizza nights are going to be one of the main things we're doing with our people in RCIA. RCIA stands for the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults. So basically people who are interested in becoming Catholic, or people who want to become Catholic, they go through a program called RCIA. We bring everybody in at the Easter Vigil to be baptized, confirmed, receive all the sacraments of initiation. So what we want to do leading up to that time is to have some discussions and presentations about the faith. So one of the things I want to do during these pizza nights is talk about things that I think are really important to someone who wants to become a Catholic. So last month, we talked about some of the reasons to become Catholic. Does anybody remember some of the things that people brought up last month? Some of the things they love about Catholicism? So the Eucharist was one, all right? So yeah, we talked about how amongst Christian denominations, we Catholics are pretty unique amongst all denominations, that we still believe what the original Christians thought about communion, that it's not symbolic, it's not a metaphor, it really is the body and blood of Jesus. Right? We take Jesus literally, what he said at the Last Supper, this is my body, this is my blood. What were some other things we talked about last month? Yes, Kathy? Yeah, we talked about the universality of the Mass. So one of the beautiful things about becoming Catholic is you really do enter into a universal family. You can be in Japan or China or Italy or South America, anywhere, and you can feel right at home in the Catholic Church. The same doctrines, the same liturgies. It's a beautiful thing. Absolutely. What else did we mention? Anybody remember we talked about apostolic succession? All right, what is apostolic succession again? What did you say, Mrs. Brooks? Yes, exactly. So basically, apostolic succession means that every priest and bishop in the church is ordained by a bishop, and that bishop was ordained by another bishop, who was ordained by another bishop. It goes all the way back to the original apostles, which is pretty amazing. John Henry Newman, who's one of my heroes, he's St. John Henry Newman now. He was a very famous Anglican theologian who taught at Oxford University back in the 1800s. And he famously started investigating, and he thought that all the churches in the world, basically the whole point is we need to go back to what was the original church. Right? What were the original teachings? And basically what he found is that there's really only two denominations in the world that actually even claim to be the original church. It's the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Right? The other denominations don't even claim it. Okay? So pretty amazing. So that was one of the reasons why he became a Roman Catholic eventually. Anything else that we talked about last month? Things we really love about Catholicism? I seem to remember Adam Fitz saying something very philosophical.
Objective truth.
Yeah, objective truth. So Adam Fitz made the point last month that in our modern age, it seems like so many things are up for grabs, so many traditional teachings or doctrines of our culture, if you will. Right? A lot of times our modern people don't like to talk about dogmas or doctrines, but I'll give you some examples of some doctrines that we have in our culture. Right? How many of you think that racism is evil? Right? I would call that a modern cultural doctrine. Right? How many of you think that there are only two sexes? Right? That's a doctrine, which many people are calling into question in our modern age. Right? So one of the beautiful things about the Catholic Church is that our doctrines, our dogmas, they don't ever change. Right? Unlike so many institutions in the world right now, we don't just go with the times. Our teachings and our doctrines remain the same. And that's a beautiful thing as a Catholic, that we can truly rely on it. Because the bottom line is, and I mentioned this last week or last month, is that as a priest, I spend a lot of time talking to people who are dying and preparing for their death, and they're on their deathbed. Right? Who do you think is going to have more faith in eternity? Someone who spent their whole life inventing their own doctrines, inventing their own religion, changing their own teachings according to what they wanted? Or someone who their whole life has literally submitted themselves to something objective, an objective truth? Right? When push comes to shove, we don't want a God of our own making. We want an objective truth, a God who we can truly depend on and rely on. In order for that to be the case, he has to be a God whose truths and teachings don't ever change. And that's a beautiful thing about being Catholic. All right? Any other comments about that? Okay, very good. Excellent. So tonight, I just want to have a brief conversation about the existence of God. Because I think for many of us, how many of us are cradle Catholics here tonight? All right, most of us, right? The vast majority of us. So most of us were raised in the faith. It's something that our parents handed on to us. It's something that we've lived with our whole life. And so some of these basic questions, I think many of us take for granted. And I think part of the reason why so many leave the Catholic Church is because so many people have never actually questioned these basic assumptions. And we need to be a lot better as Catholics about knowing how to ask good questions and knowing how to answer those questions. And you guys have heard me say a number of times before, the statistic says that for every one person entering the Catholic Church, 6 people are leaving. Okay? So we have 4 people here tonight who are interested in becoming Catholic, right? Statistics say that for those 4 people, 24 members of our parish are going to leave this year. Right? It's really sad and tragic. There's a lot of people leaving the church, and I'm convinced that the reason why so many people leave is because they grow up and they go to college and they have some professor who debunks the faith and they get concerned and they start to doubt and they leave. Or someone grows up to be an adult and some sort of tragedy happens in their life and all of a sudden they're questioning, how can I really believe in this God when all these terrible things happen? Right? So it's very important for us that we understand why we believe what we believe. Right? It's a shame that so many Catholics, talking with someone who is doubting God or doubting the faith, we feel completely at a loss to actually convince them of why our faith is true. So we need to really counteract that, okay? So tonight I want to talk about the existence of God. How do we know that God is real? So to start, I want to actually invite you guys to have a conversation at your tables. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I want you to come up with the greatest argument you can think of for why God is not real. What is the greatest argument you can think of why God is not real? All right, talk amongst yourselves. Juan and Mercedes. No, Whoever comes up with the best argument, Rick Bizdock said he's going to give you $20. So that was a joke. Sorry, I thought you guys would laugh. This is embarrassing. It's awkward.
I thought it was funny. We're just deep in conversation. We got giggles.
Okay. All right. I'll give you 10 more seconds.
Come up with an answer.
Why not?
All right. What do you guys have? What are the best arguments you could think of for why God is not real? All right. Mr. Carl in the back.
Why would he allow all these terrible things to be happening?
Okay, why would God allow all these terrible things to happen? Right? Like people being murdered, innocent people being tortured, bone cancer, etc. Okay? All right? That's one argument. Okay, what else do we come up with? Yes, in the back. So how can God, if he really is all good, then how can he create people who are capable of such terrible things? Okay, very good. So pretty similar to what Andy said. Okay? Were there any other arguments that were brought up? Yeah, Mr. Oppie. Very good. I've never seen God, so how do I know he's real? Right? It's like, how do I know Santa Claus is real? How do I know the Easter Bunny is real? Right? Very good. Yeah. All right. Very common objection. Yeah, Mrs. Leaf Green, did you have something else? He stole it? All right. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Mr. Dye.
atheistic groups in the United States have tried for a long time to get us to believe that Genesis 1:1 did not exist, that was not real. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So many people today believe in evolution, they believe in Big Bang, they believe in everything else except God. And He seems the least likely to them because of how they've been taught for so many years.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Thank you, Doug. So, all right, you guys are really good. You guys are hitting on all of the things that I thought you would say, actually. So, the main reasons why people stop believing in God is because we can't see God. And so people really question that. How can we believe in something we don't see? Right? We talked about the problem of suffering, the problem of evil. If God is all-knowing and all-good, why would He let so many terrible things happen? And then finally, what Doug is touching on is basically the relation between church and science. Right? Science seems to contradict the Bible. Okay? Yeah, very good, Kathy. Do you have something else to add?
God never answers my prayers.
God never answers my prayers. Excellent. These are really good. You guys are doing a great job. Excellent. So I actually don't have $20, and I don't know if Rick does, but if he does, I'm going to say it should go to our friend in the back. She's doing a great job as a volunteer. I think she had a great way of describing it. So, yeah, we'll give her a hand. If anybody else has $20, I guess you can, I don't know, give Rick a break. All right, so I'd like to talk about each of these just one by one, and then actually what I'd like to close with is I'd like to do something similar to what we just did. If somebody was going to ask you, why do you believe in God? I want your table to come up with what is the best argument for God's existence. Okay, so we're going to do that after we close, or after I go through some of these, okay? And I think I'm going to actually ask for crowd participation again tonight, because I actually really like that. And it makes it a lot easier on me, because I don't have to do as much preparation. You guys do a lot of the teaching and talking for me. Okay, so the question about God being invisible. If we can't see God, how do we know that He's real? Anybody have a good response to that? Let me ask you this. What are some things that we can't see, but you are 100% certain are real? Yeah, Paige? Wind, okay? So wind, we can't see it, but wind isn't really technically invisible, right? If our eyes were strong enough, we'd be able to see wind, right? Okay? Yeah, Ms. Kingery. Love. All right, so love is invisible, right? We can't touch it. We can't measure it, right? If I were to ask Lisa Dye, prove to me that your husband loves you, right? Is she really going to be able to prove beyond any sort of doubt at all? She'll say things like, well, he says he loves me. He does things for me. And well, Lisa, but how do you know it's not all just an act? Right? Maybe he doesn't really love you at all. Maybe he just uses you. Right? You can't prove it beyond any sort of doubt, and yet many of us still believe in love, right? Okay? What else do we have? Yeah, Sophie. The soul. Okay, what is the soul, actually? I think that's kind of an interesting thing to say, because a lot of people, I think, in our modern culture would actually say that you can see your soul. Do you know what I'm talking about? What would an atheistic person say about your soul? You think you have some sort of invisible soul, but don't you realize that you're just a bunch of electrons and protons, and the more you can magnify your brain cells all throughout your body, you'd realize that there's really no such thing as a soul? It's all just in your brain, right? Okay, so how do you prove to somebody? Well, we don't even want to talk about that, okay? So soul is something that's invisible, that we believe in, okay? Even though I would suggest there's a lot of people in our culture who really don't believe we have souls. I think we're just brains, right? What else? What are other things that are invisible that we are 100% certain are real? Yeah, Peggy. Okay, so feelings. So if Peggy tells me that she feels happy, right, I can't see happiness. I can't see that emotion. I can't see those feelings. And yet I believe her when she tells me she's feeling it, right? Just like if Joe is saying that he's picturing a red elephant in his mind, right? I believe him when he says that, even though I can't see it. Okay, so thoughts. Okay, very good. What are some other things that we believe are real that we can't see? Can you think of anything else? Yeah, Ben? Gravity, very good, my favorite one. Okay, I think Ben is remembering us talking about this before, okay? Yeah. So I actually think gravity is the perfect example, right? Everybody in our modern age believes in gravity, and yet literally, you can't put gravity under a microscope. You can't touch it or feel it. All you see is the effects of gravity, okay? Just like when you read a work of Shakespeare, even though you can't see or talk to Shakespeare, you believe that he wrote those plays, right? You see the effects of his work, okay? So it's very important, right? I'll give you one nice example, something I always like to say. How many of you believe that I have a mom? How many of you have ever met her? Probably none of you. I guess Doug claims that he's met her. I don't know.
I thought you said never met.
Oh, okay, yeah. So none of you have ever met my mom, and yet all of you are 100% certain that I have a mom, or at the very least, I used to have a mom, right? And yet you've never seen her. There's all sorts of things we believe in, even though we can't see, okay? God is the same way. Even though we can't see him or feel him, we see the effects of God in our world, and therefore we can believe that he's real, right? All right, very good. So that argument is out of the way. All right, what were the other things we talked about? What about the Genesis 1 argument, okay? Someone says, well, science has contradicted the Bible. It contradicts God, right? What about evolution? What's your response to that? Yes, Dr. Schmidt. Dr. PhD in science. Dr. Paul Schmidt, yes.
So, I don't know, it's sort of related to point one, but, sorry, can you remind me of the question one more time?
Yeah, someone tells you that science has disproved God, it contradicts the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera.
So, like, I mean, about evolution specifically, the Catholic Church doesn't actually adopt a specific stance on, like, was there actually, you know, a singular Adam and Eve, right? Or did that happen after some point of evolution, and then God endowed, you know, the species and elevated them? The Catholic Church doesn't take a real specific position on that, at least as of yet. So there's no problem with, at least as far as the Catholic is concerned, believing in evolution and also believing what Genesis says, whereby we take a lot of it figuratively. And then, I don't know, I guess my principal criticism would be that people have replaced science with scientism. So a belief that if science can't teach it to you, then it's impossible to know anything about it. But I think we kind of disproved that with everything we said in the first item.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dr. Schmidt. Let's give him a hand. I have nothing else to say about this subject. Excellent. No, yeah, I think he just makes a very good point, right? It's very important for us to understand that as Catholics, the Church has never said that you can't believe in evolution and still believe in God, right? The Church has never said that. The Church never will say that. Although, like you guys have heard me talk about before, there is a huge movement amongst biologists that is actually going against at least Darwinian evolution. There's a huge movement in the world today, in the scientific world, that is really beginning to question traditional understandings of evolution. The basic problem is that we seem to see micro levels of evolution. We see species that can evolve, right? But we don't ever actually have any proof, at least to date, of any species starting out as one species and becoming another, right? And there's all sorts of other reasons why many modern scientists are beginning to question this theory of evolution. So yeah, I think that's very good. And then I think it's also important for us to remember that as Catholics, we need to be really proud of ourselves, because there's never been an institution which has been more supportive of science, right? Galileo was an devout Catholic. Galileo died as a Catholic. His daughter became a nun, right? Copernicus, who supposedly, you know, was causing all these changes, Copernicus himself, many people think that he was a monk, right? It was the Catholic Church in the first place that was actually funding Galileo's research. It was the man who became the Pope, who eventually condemned his writings, who had been the one who was the main benefactor of his work. right? Even in our modern age with the Big Bang Theory, this idea that the world was originally nothing, and then in one moment it exploded, and the universe has been expanding ever since then, right? The person who came up with that theory himself was actually a Catholic priest. He was a Jesuit from Belgium, right? The Catholic Church has never had any issues with science. Science is never going to disprove God. It cannot disprove God, because God is not a part of the universe, and that's all science can teach us. Science can teach us all sorts of things about the universe, about what things are, how they work, but science can't teach us about things that are invisible. And science can't even teach us about everything in the world, right? So like a scientist, for example, could teach you how to build an atomic bomb, but a scientist can't tell you what you should do with it, right? That's what Doc was talking about when he said scientism. There's many people in our modern age who think that science is the be-all, end-all of all things. Science can answer every question we have. Don't ever contradict science. Don't ever question science, right? Which in itself is ridiculous, because science is always evolving and changing. It's famously said that if you're married to any one scientific theory in one age, you'll be a widow in the next, right? Science is always developing and changing. So very good. I think we talked about a lot of these things. Now I want to talk about this other question about suffering and evil. And this is kind of the biggest problem with belief in God. I think this is maybe the most common reason why people leave, and maybe the hardest one to answer. So does anybody have a good idea for how to respond to something like that? If God really is all good, why does he allow some of those things to happen? Yes, Jerry Graben.
Well, it's a chance for people to offer up their suffering for the sins they've committed to God.
Okay.
And people should remember that. We ain't going to go out of here on a cloud. We may go out of here in a way we don't prove that, or just boom on the head.
Yes, I think that's a very good way of saying it. Jerry said that there's some good things can come out of suffering. You can offer it up for somebody else. Okay, so very good. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Mr. Donovan?
It's because of free will.
Free will, say more.
If we didn't have free will, then we would just be controlled by God. And what he wants from us is to love him.
Yeah, we love freedom, don't we? Freedom is a really big deal in our modern culture, right? So thanks be to God, God actually gives us freedom. He doesn't want us to be like robots, right? But because he gives us freedom, that automatically gives a chance for people to do wicked things. Okay, very good. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Mrs. Crow? It's part of the journey to get to heaven, she said? Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm glad Peggy said that, because that's something I was thinking too, is that sometimes when really bad things happen to us, sometimes it's actually really good for us. Because if we don't experience suffering, many of us can go through our whole lives feeling like we don't need God at all, right? Sometimes we need to actually experience suffering and the limitations of our mortality in order to actually realize our need for God. So yeah, suffering can sometimes actually bring us a lot closer to God. Yeah. Dr. Smith?
So I don't know if this is quite what we're looking for, but the other thing that I've heard said on this topic that I guess is maybe a little more of an offensive point rather than a defensive one is like, okay, well, everyone goes through suffering, right? It's not like it's only atheists or only people of faith or something. So everyone goes through it. At least, you know, if you're a person of faith, there's a reason why, and you can make something of it rather than it just being completely and totally meaningless.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. So he's basically just said that even though evil and suffering is not good, then for us as Catholics at least, it's not completely meaningless, right? Jesus proved that on the cross. He took the most terrible suffering and he made it into the most salvific act in all of human history. Yeah, Nicole?
So it kind of goes along with what we've already been saying, but we're here on earth, but we're not meant for earth. We're meant for heaven where there is no suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, it's she said that we're here on earth, but we're meant for heaven. So again, suffering, sometimes it can remind us of our limitations, reminding us that we're actually made for another world. Yeah, very good. I think those are all really good responses, okay? So, I think what I'd like to do at this point, again, we're running out of time here pretty soon, but I do want to do that exercise that I suggested earlier. I'd like each of you at your tables to come up with the best argument you can think of for why God is real. and we'll see who comes up with the best argument. And I will be the arbitrary judge.
Give us $20.
And I don't have $20, so. What is the best argument for knowing that God is real? I'll give you 2 minutes. Okay, I'll give you 10 seconds. All right, okay. So, I've heard a lot from this side of the room tonight, but I know that Ron Hess is a really big philosopher, theologian. So I'm kind of interested to hear what his table came up with first. Okay? Are you going to be the spokesman, Ron?
Well, Julie says the
Julie says.
But I think often all the variables around Mary and how undisputed these things are. I mean, how we're so sure that they did.
Yeah.
My thoughts would be out Mary that we had.
Yeah, that's it.
And I do like that, so the devil is real.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Thank you, Ron. Mr. Philosopher, that's what I'm talking about. I told you guys. Okay. So miracles, literally in the church. So one of the things that I don't want to say I dislike this, okay, because I don't want to make anybody feel judged, okay, but we have a habit in our culture sometimes of saying lots of different things are miracles. Like, oh man, a new baby, a miracle, right? Oh man, the food was all prepared on time, a miracle, right? Oh man, the Indianapolis Colts won again, it's a miracle, right? No. All right, so it's really important for us to understand what exactly a miracle is, especially in terms of the Catholic Church. What a miracle literally means is that we have this world that we are part of, and it works in an orderly way, and yet there are times where literally things happen in the world that are unexplainable by natural reasons. Science can't explain it, philosophy can't explain it, nobody can explain it, right? That's what a miracle is. And that's what Ron's table is bringing up, is all the miracles in church history. The apparitions of Mary, for example. We talked about Our Lady of Guadalupe this past weekend. Another really famous apparition of Mary is Our Lady of Fatima. There were 70,000 people in Fatima, Portugal, in 1917, who saw Mary appear. Right? 70,000 people all testified to it. And many of them were actually skeptics going in. There were actually a number of communists at Fatima that day who were specifically there so they could write articles for their communist newspapers talking about how they were there and nothing happened. Right? And yet everyone testified to what they saw. Okay, so miracles are a really big deal. Okay, what else? What are some other arguments or reasons? I'm not going to call on any specific tables this time. Although I haven't. What about Bernie and Donna's table? What do you guys think of? Anything good? Oh my gosh, they said baby. See, I knew I shouldn't have said it. Okay, all right. But can you say something about that? So even though babies aren't exactly a miracle, couldn't we say that that is an argument for God, the fact that we have babies? The fact that you and I are able to be conscious and alive? The fact that you and I are able to build things like skyscrapers right? That's pretty amazing in itself. What makes us different from all the other creatures? How do we explain that? If we are intelligent creatures, doesn't that mean that we had to have been created by someone else who is himself intelligent? Okay. Yeah, very good. So that's another reason you can give for God. Consciousness, life in itself is almost miraculous in itself. I like to give the analogy that atheists who don't believe in God are like cells that don't believe in the brain, right? The brain controls how many billions of our cells all at the same time, and yet we as human beings, we take for granted that we're actually alive and that someone else is holding us in existence, right? Just like the brain does with the cells of the body. What other arguments do people come up with? Reasons to believe in God. We talked about miracles. We talked about the amazing gift of life. What else do people come up with? Yeah, over here, Mrs. Lobby. Nature. Yeah, so just looking out at the world, right? We can see that this had to have come from someone or something, right? Why is there something rather than nothing? And again, going back to our scientific conversation, even in our modern age, science, again, is proving and pointing to this. Because as you all know, science claims that the world had a beginning, right? That's what the Big Bang teaches, that 14.7 billion years ago, the world literally began to exist. Can you think of anything else in the world that began to exist that did not have a cause? It's impossible, right? If something begins to exist, something has to cause it to exist. The world literally began to exist, supposedly, 14.7 billion years ago. Who caused it? Right? God, okay? You can also look at the order of the universe. People, again, scientists, they like to talk about the laws of nature and how ordered everything is, right? Where did all those laws come from? Couldn't the world just be some completely random, chaotic experience? Instead, it's not. It's predictable. It's intelligible. It's ordered, right? Very good. All right, any other arguments? Yeah, Eric.
Kind of along the lines of what you were saying earlier is, to me, the fact that we can deny our built-in nature and do something different. So our own intellect.
So you said our own intellects and our own ability to be free.
Right. So like an animal has instinct. They can't deny that instinct. We have a kind of a natural instinct, but we have the ability to push that off and decide not to follow it.
Yeah, we have free will, basically. Yeah. Anything else that's created, somebody creates a robot or something like that. Robots or computers are never really going to be completely free, unlike human beings. Yeah, so where does that come from? Excellent. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Peggy?
Talents.
Our talents? Say more about that.
Talents that we think we come up with them, but people are left and right-handed. I'm both. I'm mainly left, but I can use both. But it's just you think you come up with a great idea. No, that's God putting that idea.
Yeah. So kind of talking about before. So the talents we have, the way we live our life, it kind of goes back to what Donna was saying about the fact that we're alive at all. Right? Very good. So I just want to mention two last arguments before we close, right? Because it's time for the music, I think. We'll have a little break and then we'll have some music. But just two things I want to mention before we close. Two other really famous arguments that people have given for belief in God. The first one is the argument from morality. And this is, C.S. Lewis talks about this in Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis makes the point that there are certain things that all humans believe are wrong. And where did that conscience, where did those laws that are in our mind come from? So in our modern age, this is a little bit harder to say this because, again, in our modern age, so many people are starting to question everything, right, about what is right and wrong. But I imagine if you asked 100% of the people in this room, is it ever okay to torture an innocent child? I bet all of you would say no. Right? There are some things that just simply are never right and are always evil, and all of us realize it. Where does that come from? It comes from someone who wrote those moral laws on our souls, right? And if we choose to sin, if we choose to go away from our conscience, obviously we can be dulled a little bit in that sense. But there are some things that all of us for certain know are wrong, everywhere and all the time. So you can give that argument for morality. The last thing I want to say is, again, something that's made famous by C.S. Lewis, and that is the argument by desire. All of us, whether we realize it or not, are made for another world, like Nicole was saying. And if you pay attention to your life experience, you can actually understand that and recognize it. All of us, as human beings, we have an infinite desire in our soul that is never quite fulfilled in this life, right? So I like to play music, for example. Right? So when I'm playing music and I'm learning a new song, I tend to be really invested in that song, right? I think about it for days and weeks. And then it's like as soon as I get the song down, I'm bored with it. Right? Or if I ever get the craving for some sort of food, like I really like Taco Bell. I don't know how much you guys like Taco Bell, but I am just like so many times I'm just jonesing for Taco Bell, and then I go and I eat Taco Bell, and what happens?
You regret it.
I feel terrible, okay, right? I'm longing for satisfaction, and I'm left dissatisfied, right? Your favorite song that you love to listen to over and over, eventually it gets old, right? There's so many things like that in life where we are constantly seeking to be fulfilled and satisfied, and yet constantly being let down. Right? Why is that? It's because the desire we have for happiness and fulfillment in our souls is literally infinite, which means that all these finite things of this world will never be able to satisfy them and fulfill them. You guys have heard me give the example of Tom Brady before, that interview he gave back in 2007 when he was asked about winning 3 Super Bowl rings, being a very attractive man, being married to a supermodel, accomplishing all his dreams, right? And what was his response? Man, I feel like it's got to be more than this. I mean, I've accomplished my life dreams, my goals, and I just think, man, there's got to be more than this. He's right. There has to be more than this. We're never going to be completely fulfilled or satisfied in this life, and that should point to us that we're meant to be fulfilled by something infinite beyond this world. Right? Someone gave us that desire in the first place. All right, so these are all the different arguments for belief in God. So I hope this has been helpful tonight, because I really do. I think that many of us, we like to believe in God, we want to believe in God, but when push comes to shove, when really difficult things happen in our life, sometimes it's hard for us to remember and to know. Because they feel good things when they're in church and things like that, but you're not always going to feel good things in church. And so it's important that your faith isn't based on feelings. It has to be based on your mind. Just like no matter what happens to you in your life, you're never going to stop believing that 2 + 2 = 4. That's the way our belief in God needs to be. We need to be sure. We need to know why God is real. And in fact, that is what the Catholic Church teaches. The Catholic Church teaches that every single human being in this world is able to know for certain that God exists. It's not a question. So people who don't believe in God, they're literally missing something. And we need to be able to point that out to them. And I hope that this conversation tonight is a little bit helpful for that. So now we're going to take a break for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to have some music. So everybody feel free to grab some more pizza, grab a drink. There's a beautiful dessert bar in the back with delicious bourbon balls. So, all right, everybody go back there. We'll start music in a few minutes.